The main pest in my Pacific Northwest garden isn't what's causing this damage. No, it's the other pest.
Slugs are the #1 pest I deal with in this garden, and you can see all about how I deal with them in my prior video on that topic. The #2 pest, at least for me because I grow a lot of brassicas, is the imported cabbage worm. If you grow cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and some things I don't grow like collards, really anything in the brassica family, including some of the Asian greens like bok choy and of course napa cabbage, they're all susceptible to this. You probably already know about the cabbage worm or have experienced it even if you didn't really know its name. It starts with a little white butterfly drifting through the garden. If you're like me, you may have found these things charming at first. Maddie, my 3-year-old daughter, calls them butterflies and loves to chase them around. They look harmless, but then a few days later, you start seeing holes in the leaves of your brassicas. Just a few small holes at first, then ragged edges. Suddenly, the center of a cabbage or a broccoli plant has been chewed up by a green caterpillar that is almost exactly the same color as the leaf. A casual glance isn't going to spot them. The imported cabbage worm is the larval stage of the cabbage white butterfly, Perius rape. It's called imported because it's not originally from North America. It came from Europe, and it appeared in Canada in the mid-1800s. Then it spread across the continent. So when I see that little white butterfly moving around the garden, I'm not just looking at a pretty insect. I'm looking at a very successfully introduced species that found exactly what it needed here: gardens, farms, weeds in the mustard family, and plenty of brassicas. One reason it's so successful is that it fits neatly into the rhythm of our gardens. First, the adult butterfly lays eggs on brassica leaves. Second, those eggs hatch into small green caterpillars. And third, the caterpillars feed on the leaves, then eventually pupate to become butterflies. That begins their life cycle all again. Depending on the climate, there can be multiple generations in a single growing season. That means this is not always a one-time pest. You can control one round and then you'll see another wave later in your season. The other important thing is how it gets through winter. Imported cabbage worms overwinter as pupae and chrysalises. They can attach themselves to plant material, garden debris, fences, nearby structures, or sheltered places around the garden as autumn moves along. More of the pupae enter a dormant state that allows them to survive for months before emerging the next season. This is one reason garden cleanup matters. I don't mean the garden needs to be stripped bare or made sterile. I don't garden that way, but old brassica debris, abandoned plants, and mustard family weeds can all help carry these pest problems forward. When I'm done with a cabbage or a broccoli plant, I don't usually leave the pest-ridden remains sitting there indefinitely. If it has been heavily affected, I want that material out of the bed. Now, imported cabbage worms are not the only caterpillars that can damage brassicas. The damage you see may come from getting cabbage loopers and diamondback moth larvae. To the casual eye, all these caterpillars look like little green monsters eating the same crops, but there are some differences. I originally thought I was getting attacked by cabbage loopers. That was the name or term that I'd always heard thrown around. But then I learned that cabbage loopers come from a moth that flies at night, not the little white butterflies. While I may have a cabbage looper here and there, or may have had one in the past, what I'm seeing are those white moths, and that's the imported cabbage worm. When I do find little caterpillars on these, I've been able to confirm by sight that they are the imported cabbage worm, not the looper. The imported cabbage worm is grainy, a little fuzzy or velvety, and often has a faint pale stripe down its back. I'm usually getting them where they're very small, so they can be very difficult to see because they are extremely tiny. Cabbage loopers, on the other hand, move with a classic inchworm motion. They arch their bodies as they crawl, and it creates a loop-like shape. That's why they're called cabbage loopers. Diamondback moth larvae, which I'm not sure I've ever seen myself, are much smaller. They tend to wriggle and drop from the plant when they're disturbed. Ultimately, for my purposes in the home garden, I don't really need to identify every caterpillar to the species level because my methods of control are the same across these different caterpillar species. Aside from keeping the garden beds clean and trying to find these caterpillars visually, my go-to method is using BT. It stands for Bacillus thuringiensis. For caterpillars, the version most gardeners use is BTK, Bacillus thuringiensis kerstaki. BT has a fascinating history. It was first isolated in the 1900s by a Japanese biologist, Shigetane Ishiwata, who was studying a disease that was killing silkworms. Later, a German scientist, Ernst Berliner, later rediscovered it from diseased flower moth caterpillars in Thuringia, Germany, which is where the name thuringiensis comes from. So this is not a new thing to the garden. Bt has been around for more than a century. By the 1920s, Bt spores and their insecticidal proteins were being used in pest control. By the 1930s, Bt was being used commercially in agriculture, and in 1961, Bt products were registered by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. When I use Bt in the garden, I'm using a biological control with a long history behind it. What makes Bt so interesting is how specific it is. Bt is not a broad-spectrum poison in the usual sense. It works because the bacterium provides crystal proteins that affect particular insects when they eat them. Those proteins are activated in the alkaline gut of susceptible insects and bind to the gut wall, damaging the insect from the inside. That's a key point for the home gardener. Bt has to be eaten. It's a stomach poison for caterpillars. It's not a spray that works just because it touches them. When I use Bt, I'm not trying to blast every insect in the garden. I'm trying to coat the brassica leaves where the caterpillars are feeding. Then the caterpillar eats the treated leaf, it stops feeding. It may sit there for a day or two, but the damage to the plant should stop fairly quickly. There are a few things about Bt to keep in mind. Bt is going to work best on young, small caterpillars. If you wait until the caterpillars are large, the leaves are already shredded, you're too late for Bt to be that effective. Coverage matters. Since the caterpillar has to eat it, I need to spray the parts of the plant where they're feeding, the tops, the leaves, the undersides of the leaves, and the folded growing centers of brassicas. Timing matters. Sunlight breaks it down, so I prefer to spray it late in the day or on a cloudy day. That gives it more time to remain active on the leaves, and if we get a heavy rain, I assume I'm going to have to reapply it. Bt is used far beyond home gardens. In agriculture, Bt has been used as a microbial spray on crops. It's also being used in modern biotech, where Bt genes have been engineered in a major crop so the plants will produce those Bt proteins on their own. That includes crops like Bt corn, Bt cotton. Those were developed to control major insect pests and reduce reliance on some conventional insecticidal sprays. These agricultural uses are one of the reasons Bt is so important, also one of the reasons people worry about overusing it. The evolutionary process means that a pest control like Bt will eventually lose its effectiveness if pests are exposed to it too often. Bt-resistant bugs will eventually be upon us, and our only hope is to slow that down and have an effective tool as long as possible. Unfortunately, this has already been borne out. Resistance to Bt is already developed in some pest populations where exposure has been repeated and intense with big ag. Ultimately, that is a collective action problem, and our use of it in the home gardens is a drop in the bucket compared to the scale at which it's been used or could be misused in large agricultural systems. Another concern which could actually affect our home gardens is disturbing the balance of our natural ecosystem. If we use Bt to completely eradicate every sign of any caterpillar or moth, then there's no food for their predators. Our gardens simply won't support those predators, which means those predators will not be in our gardens. This means we will always be reliant on using controls as opposed to nature. For example, there are tiny parasitic wasps that attack cabbage worms. Sometimes you'll find a sluggish caterpillar with a little yellow cocoon nearby. Given the pervasive holes on my brassicas, it's pretty clear that I've never been able to fully control them. I simply don't get out here with the Bt on a regular enough schedule to make that a concern. I think my use of it in the garden has kept me from being totally overwhelmed and allowed me to have some amount of cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower harvests. Let's not forget that the large amount of cabbage worms here were not native to North America in the first place. I use Bt where the problem is on the brassicas. I don't apply it across the entire garden. I'm literally using a little spray bottle and spraying individual plants, not broadcasting the stuff. And another reason not to just broadcast the Bt everywhere is that it could affect caterpillars that you're not trying to get rid of. The kind of caterpillars that create beautiful butterflies. I'm not planting milkweed or other things that typically attract monarch butterflies, so I don't think that the Bt in my case is having much impact there. But it could, and that's what you have to be aware of. And remember, a few holes on a cabbage leaf or on a broccoli leaf don't really matter. Usually to the ultimate cabbage head or the broccoli flower, when you harvest it, holes in the leaves are just fine. It's a little more disappointing on the bok choy or the napa cabbage because it's those very leaves with the holes in it. That's what we're trying to eat. But what really bothers me is when the damage is accelerating, when the caterpillars are getting ahead of the plant, and they're moving into the parts of the crop that I actually want to harvest. like deep into the cauliflower, into the head of the cabbage. That's when I definitely want to act. For imported cabbage worms, my system is pretty simple. I watch for those white butterflies. I start paying attention to the leaves to see when they get holes in them. I try to see if I can actually see the caterpillars on the leaves, but ultimately, even if I don't see them, I can assume they are there when the holes start appearing after white butterflies. Then I start spraying the BT specifically on just those plants. The imported cabbage worm has arrived here from Europe more than a century ago, but it's part of the reality of growing brassicas here in North America. BT has been part of the pest control story for more than a century as well, from diseased silkworms to flower moths to organic garden sprays to modern agricultural crops. When I use BT in the garden, I try to remember two sides to that history. It's an elegant but powerful biological tool, and like any tool, it works best when used with observation and respect for the larger ecosystem. Tomato update, take 3, 1 cam, 1 audio. Well, I'm out here to check on the tomatoes. It's been a couple of weeks since we planted them, so let's take a look at how they're looking over here. Actually, my first bucket is potatoes. I'll show you those while we're looking, and then we'll just kind of go down the row and see how the tomatoes are coming out so far. Container row, which I could call tomato row, except for my one potato in there, and then the artichoke on the end. So this first barrel are the potatoes, and I need to put some more potting soil in there because they are climbing out. And it looks like I got a squash plant that fell down into it. But that, I think, is just a branch that needs to be removed. And then we've got the next one, which is the orange Peruche tomato here. And this one probably needs to be tied up at this point. It's kind of a little bit wild in terms of it. I will prune some suckers. I won't necessarily single stem the whole thing, but I will prune some things back to keep it kind of within the frame of this, within the footprint of this bucket, all the way up this hole as we go. Next one is the Jersey Devil. Looks good. It's got one little tie around the base. It's about ready for another tie a little farther up to the stake. We can see here that for some reason the marigolds that I planted in here didn't take. Not sure why that happened. One did, and looking back at the orange Peruche, those took. So, you know, it's kind of an interesting thing. Some things take, some things don't. Over here, this one needs to definitely be tied up, organized, maybe some of the branches trimmed away from the bottom. This is the Champagne Bubbles currant tomato. Again, the marigolds didn't seem to take well there. Not sure why. Maybe it was too cold for them at the time. And then over here, you can see, this is why I love growing the Japanese black truffle. It always grows vigorously and strongly right away. And so, yeah, it's already got flowers on it here. So we'll be doing good there. Here, a couple of the marigolds took, well, 3 of them took, and then a couple of didn't. So again, not sure why. Keep in mind, these are all French marigolds. They came from the same trays. So it's not like, well, some of them were better to start with. They were all kind of about the same when I planted them. Basil in the back, that one's doing okay. It hasn't really been warm enough consistently for the basil to really take off yet. Okay, and then we come over here and we have the sweet aperitif, which is another currant, a red currant tomato there. The basil is struggling a little bit with the cool out here. Most of the marigolds, except for one, have done okay. And then we've got the supernova. And poor guy just did not like it. I don't know, maybe it didn't like the weather, not sure. You can see the marigolds kind of. I even have one that is starting to bloom here, and I've got one little basil hanging on back there. Over here, the pink oxheart's actually doing pretty good. It's got a nice strong stem to it there. Basil that's in there is okay. The other basil that's in there is struggling. Marigolds all did okay in this pot, or in this barrel. And then we come over here to the large pot and we have an orange currant. This is another currant tomato. 2 of the marigolds did okay. 2 of them did not. But then orange currant is actually starting to flower there, so that's great. And moving over here, let's see, I don't remember what this one was. Let's see if I have a, oh, this is the currant. Yeah, white currant is always very vigorous. These were old seeds that I had from Territorial Seed. I mean old by, they were maybe 4 or 5 years old seed that I keep saving because I had so much of the seed and I just keep planting it every year. I enjoy the taste of it in the garden. And my marigolds around it are doing fine. Again, the basil's struggling. That's a pretty much universal theme. The basil's pretty much struggling throughout all these, and I think that is just the weather that we've had. And then over here, this guy needs some tying up here. I don't have a label on it, so I don't remember exactly what this one was. It's a secondary of something. Sure. Maybe it's it's a Jersey Devil, maybe it's a Nova. It'd be nice if it's a Nova, since that's the one that is almost dead in the other pot. I do have backups of everything in red cups still, so I can go back and replace some of these that died. I also have backups of the marigold, so I can replace the ones that have just died out there. And you can see the basil that was in here just didn't last at all. This is the artichoke, kind of in the middle of the line here, not in the middle of the line, but toward the end of the line. Has nothing to do with tomatoes, just happens to be there. And then I get to my last tomato plant here, which is another orange Peruche, and it's doing okay, doing fine. Oddly enough, the basil in this pot just took off and is doing better than any of the others, and the marigolds are doing good. So that's my tomato review. I guess before I let you go, let's jump back down here and I'll just show you the reserves. I've got lots of reserves and hopefully I'll find places to still plant these out. But yeah, I've got lots of reserves here. So yeah, no problem with something failing over in the container row because I can just replace it there. But ideally it'd be nice if I can find some other spots in the garden to throw these into. Well, I'm out here harvesting lettuce again, and I've done this before. What's different this day in harvesting lettuce is I'm getting a romaine. I'm not quite sure I've gotten a full head there, but I want to get it now before it gets too big. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the romaine, and then I'm going to take a couple of these, and that's going to be the main event for our dinner tonight. I'm just assuming that there's going to be some kind of leaves here when I pull this that I'm not going to want to keep. Actually, it's pretty clean. I mean, I want to get as much of these as I can for the salad. I'm going to taste this one just to see if it's... Yeah, it's okay. There's some kind of damage here. I don't know what that is. Maybe I'll cut that and then see if it reveals anything nasty. No, I'm not really seeing anything. There we go. This is kind of what you normally see in the supermarket, is the head of the romaine there. Nice. Yeah, I don't know. It's been a challenge to grow a lot of these. I planted a lot of seeds of these, and this is the only one I've got so far. I've got 2 more that are growing over on the other side. Maybe they'll head up and I'll have them, depending on how the weather goes. And then I've got a bunch in a bell tray for succession planting. So we'll give it some more shots this season, see how it goes. But I'm eating it tonight, so I may as well just peel it apart right now. Make sure there's nothing. Oh, this looks beautiful. Head of romaine. Harvest those 2 back there. That's probably more than we'll need for tonight, but we may as well just harvest a bunch of them now, and then we'll have more for later. I say may as well. I mean, it's always nice to keep as much things in the garden bed as you can. It's a nice storage place, but the other, when something's looking nice, getting it out of the garden this is your risk, right? Because it stays in the bed, and then there's always the potential of weather change that might affect a nice looking plant, a nice looking veggie crop, or bug thing that comes along that wasn't there before. So when something looks nice, if I know I'm going to eat it that week, I may as well. And typically, I know I've listened to like podcasts and things by kind of market gardens and farmers. They typically will do their harvests like once or twice a week. You know, it's a big thing they do once or twice a week, and then they package it all up. And then, you know, it's not like they're not typically harvesting every single day. Of course, the ability to harvest every day, that would be the advantage of the home garden over the farm. So kind of balance kind of what are your advantages against your own logistics and what feels right to you in terms of your harvest schedule. I wouldn't have just come out and harvested this on my own accord. My wife said, hey, can we have some lettuce for dinner tonight? So that's what inspired this round of harvesting. Wow, that looked really good. This is a good one too. Getting some good lettuce. You know, the weather turned on us here. It was getting hot, and then all of a sudden now it's been pretty cold, cooler. Cold is a relative thing, but it's been pretty cool. Eating a coat and everything, and raining on us for the last few days here. So, but this is the advantage of it. Nice, good lettuces, as long as you've done something to control the slugs. Because this kind of weather, these lettuces would be slug if you are relatively uncontrolled. And I say you've done something, your garden may naturally control it. I mean, if you've got a good balanced ecosystem, good on you. I'm not suggesting you have to do all the things I do. I'm running out of room in my basket, so rather than just peel this all here, I will take this to my washing station and deal with it there. It's a nice leaf there, so I'll try to keep that. Okay, well, that's a lot of lettuce, isn't it? Well, I'm going to be adding some of this agricultural lime to this is just pure agricultural lime that I'm going to be adding to these tomato buckets. Depending on where you're at, you may not need this at all, or what kind of fertilizer you might use, you may not need this at all. In my location here, it's typically known that the rains leach away a lot of calcium out of the soil, and what you end up with is a soil that is often a bit deficient in calcium. And the issue with calcium, which is what agricultural lime is designed to solve, is tomatoes will get what's called blossom end rot, which is kind of a black or mushy spot on the end of a tomato. And in mine, I never get blossom end rot on cherry tomatoes, so my cherries and currants are fine. The ones that would have a problem would be the saucing tomatoes and the large beefsteak tomato, the oxheart that I have. Now, typically in my garden, the first, indeterminate tomatoes, like the first flush of saucing tomatoes, end up having blossom end rot. I almost never seem to manage things well enough to keep that from happening. But then next rounds not. And usually that indicates that it's more of a water deficiency. And in fact, most blossom end rot, most soils actually do have enough calcium. It's not really a calcium deficiency. It's that the calcium is not getting properly to the plant and then ultimately to growing the tomatoes. It's not getting there properly because of ineffective watering, or watering that is uneven. So like in these whiskey barrels, for example, what that would be is if I'm watering and the barrel completely dries out, and then I'm watering again, so it's getting really dry and then really wet and then really dry and really wet, that probably sets the condition for blossom end rot no matter how much calcium is in there. So I'm not naive to think that, if I just add a little lime, I'm going to solve my problem. I really have to manage the watering of the plants well in order to solve the problem. But also know that there may be some amount of calcium deficiency. Now, I'm not going to the extent of testing, because that would be the gold standard. Test your soil, figure out where your pH is, and then do your determination there. I'm not going to that extent. I just happen to have some agricultural lime on hand, because when I was growing big beds in ground in the Pacific Northwest, that's a pretty common thing, is to lime the beds because of calcium, because of pH being balanced the way you'd like it to be. I don't think a little bit of lime will hurt it. I don't know for sure that it'll help it, but it could help. And so I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And I'm going to be putting less than 1/4 of a cup each of these. So you don't want to put a whole lot in your areas. And ideally I would have had it in the soil before I even planted, because it will take time for the lime to actually break down and really create any benefit, if any at all, here. So, but I think this will probably be good enough. And it's just a little bit of belt and suspenders, I would say. I'm not really necessarily believing or relying on it to be the ultimate issue or cure for anything. This thing doesn't really smell like anything, but it is a powdery substance, so you don't want to be breathing it in if you don't have to. And I'm just sprinkling it on there, and then I'm just going to kind of work it in just a little bit, and I'll come back, and I may not water it in this evening. It's toward the end of the day here because it's raining right now, so we may ultimately, rain may kind of get it in there for me. And that's that. Got some lime in there, and now with that, I'm not going to worry about whether the soil has enough calcium in it or not at this point. Now it'll just be, am I managing the watering enough to avoid blossom end rot? Drop over here to do the second one. Some of these I'm looking at really do need to be tied up. By the way, the lack of calcium and potentially magnesium in your soil, if you have large in-ground beds, could be the cause to some of your plants not growing the way you'd like them to, like zucchinis and stuff like that as well. And when you're looking at lime, there's plain agricultural lime like what this is. It doesn't have magnesium in it. If you get what's called dolomite lime, it has magnesium in it. And that one you want to be more careful with, because it's a lot easier to overdo the magnesium. Overdoing the magnesium can actually cause problems for the plants, as opposed to it's going to be less of an issue to potentially overdo just agricultural lime. Is not going to be as harmful as overdoing, say, dolomite lime and overdosing the magnesium. All right, that's the third one. On to the fourth one here. It's a lot of work. Well, I have a couple of trays of succession plantings of spring crops. We're now into, what is it today, June, or the week of June 8th. So it is a little bit iffy for me to have these, but the weather has turned colder, so I think I might get away with these. And I was listening to a farmer podcast of a guy who called the No-Till Growth podcast, I think is what it's called, but a farmer Jesse, and I think he's down in the southern states, and he was talking about growing lettuce through the heat down there and kind of the tricks that he uses. And so I might try to deploy some of those and share them with you as I go. I've never had success growing lettuce in the hot of the summer, even here, and here's not even like the south. But any case, what I have in these two trays behind me, let's take a quick look. I've taken them out from the lights, and so now I don't have anything under the lights at this point. These, I didn't want to buy like a big full-on thing of potting mix again, because I won't be doing that much, or a seedling mix, I should say, seedling starting mix, because I won't be doing seedlings at the scale I was earlier in the year. So I'm just using it is a Miracle Grow bagged product from Costco. I think it works really well, and actually looking at this, it's actually done well than what I had done better than what I had in the seeding mix early in my last round. The seeding mix wasn't working well. Yeah. And this stuff I previously have used for starting seeds, and it always worked well for me. The reason that, a lot of people will say, oh, you shouldn't use this for starting seeds because it's potting mix, it's not seeding mix, and the fines are too big, and it kind of might prevent seeds from popping up. I haven't really had that particular problem, or I don't feel like I have. Maybe some germination failures have been due to that, but as you've seen in my prior videos with all my other seed starting with regular seeding mix, I have plenty of germination failures the other way. So not sure that's much of a factor, the fact that the fines on here are necessarily larger. I think one of the advantages this does have is it has kind of, they've refined the mix so that it controls moisture well. And so it's not as easy to overwater or underwater this. It can hold the moisture so that if you kind of don't get to the watering right away, it's still there's still moisture in there for the seedling, which is nice. But in any case, you can see this is doing well here for now. I brought them outside. I'm always a little bit like not sure how to run my seedlings this time of year. Do I just leave them under the lights or do I get them out in a natural light as soon as possible? So these have germinated. They don't really have their first true leaves on them yet, it doesn't look like. But I'm getting them out now. This is a shady spot on my bench underneath the deck. But I'm getting them out now to get exposed to the weather and the natural light as soon as possible. I'll just have to make sure I keep them moist. But what I've got in here is I've got lettuces, so romaine lettuce and red leaf lettuce, so all kinds of lettuces in here. And so that's where I'll have to kind of figure out, how do I grow this into the heat? Because, you know, it's June, we're approaching mid-June, we're 30 days away from what's usually pretty warm in Portland, Oregon. So, and normally with the direct sun in my garden and that warmth, lettuce isn't going to grow that well. But if I maybe use some of those tricks from who I was talking about earlier, Farmer Jesse, like shade cloth or misting throughout the day, stuff like that, maybe I can make it work and I can get lettuces through the summer. That might be interesting. Anyway, over here I've got this is a bunching onions here. I've got beets. You can see there's cells that are still to germinate. I think that's fine. I still think they will germinate. I think I pulled it out early because this other stuff in the tray was doing well. And then I have bok choy, which I thinned that bok choy already. So there were several plants per cell, but I went ahead and already thinned them. So now it's down to just one seedling per cell. And yeah, these are looking good and will be ready for succession planting, and we'll see if we can get crops out of them before the heat of the summer just makes that impossible, or, as I was talking about, if I come up with kind of a methodology that lets me grow some of these cooler season crops in the heat of the summer. It'll be an interesting thing to work on, and I'll report back as we go through this season. I am going to plant out my bush beans. I only have one round of these to plant for the year. They're bush beans, my shelling bush beans specifically. These are the yin yang dry shelling bush beans. So the goal is I grow a bunch of bush beans all at once. They're for shelling purposes. I let them get to maturity. I harvest them all at once, shell them, and the beans for eating in the fall, perhaps. So that's what I'm going to see. I haven't really done that before. Kept some beans from some just regular kind of fat beans that I've grown before. I've kept them and cooked them in the fall, and it was okay, but that wasn't really what they were designed for. And so this will be fun. These are called the yin yang bean because of how they look there. I'm germinating them here in my cell tray, and then once they're germinated, I'll find a place to plop them in. Hopefully, you've seen what happens is my plan, but then they end up in a holding spot until I can find a place for them. I'm emptying these cells. I've got 3 that didn't plant, so I'm emptying them because I don't want to confuse myself. I don't want to sit there thinking I'm waiting for something to germinate.